On August 2, 1990, Iraqi military forces invaded the Emirate of Kuwait. Almost immediately after the invasion, the United States and allied countries deployed troops to the Middle East, implementing Operation Desert Shield. On November 29, 1990, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution Number 678, condemning the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait and authorizing its member states to use all necessary means to restore international peace and security in the area and ensure Iraq's withdrawal from Kuwait. The United Nations deadline expired at midnight, Eastern Standard Time, January 15, 1991. When Iraqi forces failed to comply, the coalition initiated Operation Desert Storm on January 17, 1991, with a massive air campaign. On February 15, 1991, the U.S. Army's 1st Infantry Division tasked elements of its 3rd Brigade with conducting counter-reconnaissance operations north of the berm, separating Iraqi and coalition forces roughly along the western border between Saudi Arabia and Iraq. Its mission: to destroy Iraqi reconnaissance elements and to degrade their ability to use indirect fires on the main body of the U.S. 7th Corps. 3rd Brigade 1st Infantry Division provided the headquarters for Task Force Iron. It consisted of 2 maneuver battalions, 1-4 Cav, and 1st Battalion 41st Infantry, with the 4th Battalion 3rd Field Artillery in direct support. Task Force Iron also received general support reinforcing fire from an additional 16 artillery battalions. 1st Battalion 1st Aviation Brigade provided attack helicopter support. Engineers from the 317th Engineer Battalion rounded out the task force.
Task Force Iron's mission was to conduct a covert breach of the berm on the Iraqi border and then advance through the breach to establish a screen line for the rest of the 1st Infantry Division once the main attack commenced. A breach is a synchronized combined arms activity conducted to allow maneuver through an obstacle. The task force's success rested on winning the counter-reconnaissance fight. Destroying the enemy's reconnaissance assets would prevent the Iraqis from gathering information on the coalition's intentions. This would go a long way towards setting conditions for success later in the campaign. Army Techniques publication 3-20.96 describes counter-reconnaissance as a tactical mission task that encompasses all measures taken by a commander to counter enemy reconnaissance efforts. It denies the enemy commander the ability to conduct reconnaissance and develop situational understanding. Countering enemy reconnaissance is the first and possibly most important step in ensuring the main body can execute its mission.
At 1100 on 15 February, Task Force Iron initiated movement with 2 scout weapons teams from 1-4 Cav forward. 141 Infantry followed to the east, and 1-4 Cav followed to the west. At 11:30, 4-3 Field Artillery fired on Iraqi vehicles that could observe the task force's movements. Upon reaching the border, engineers created multiple breach lanes in only 15 minutes. The squadron advanced through the breach lanes with the tanks in the lead. Shortly after noon, all of Task Force Iron was through the berm and moving north. By 14:30, the entire task force was approximately 2 kilometers inside Iraq, but still short of the limit of advance along phase line Minnesota. The task force spent the next day clearing the area and improving its position. At 21:42, the task force made contact with what was believed to be 6 vehicles moving from northwest to southeast. Since the targets were beyond the limit of advance along phase line Minnesota, the task force prepared to engage with indirect fire, but the vehicles quickly moved out of range of the forward observers. At 22:10, the task force observed a group of 3 vehicles moving north to south. As the tanks attached to 141 Infantry prepared to engage, these targets also moved out of range. At 23:39, the task force reported the presence of possible Soviet-made BTRs, accompanied by at least 1 tank traveling southeast. 15 minutes later, at 23:54, Charlie Company's Bradleys made contact with 3 vehicles. They engaged with tow missiles, but could observe no secondary explosions. The risk of fratricide is inherent in all combat operations, but this danger is only increased for reconnaissance and security assets operating forward of the main body. On the evening of 16 February into the early morning hours of 17 February, inclement weather, limited visibility, unfamiliarity with the terrain, the presence of enemy forces, and human error would all come together in a tragic outcome.
Army Techniques publication 3-20.96 notes that the counter-reconnaissance plan should address how to acquire and defeat enemy reconnaissance elements. The intelligence section provides key input into the planning process. It identifies avenues of approach into the unit sector, what type of enemy reconnaissance elements the unit expects in the sector, and when they are most likely to move into the sector. The squadron commander, or S3, uses this information to formulate the counter-reconnaissance plan and to task units to execute it.
Lieutenant Colonel Hillman was convinced they had encountered an Iraqi reconnaissance battalion. According to the task force's counter-reconnaissance plan, the Apaches of 1-1 Aviation would investigate and, if necessary, destroy any long-range contacts identified by the observers. At 23:26, the brigade commander ordered the Apache support to launch. A platoon from 1-1 Aviation lifted off shortly after midnight on 17 February, accompanied by the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Hales. The Division Tactical Command Post requested the task force turn off all ground surveillance radar to avoid confusing the Apache's radar sensors. The Apache's new radar warning system had been installed on the aircraft only a few weeks prior to the unit's deployment. This system used a synthetic voice to warn crew members of possible enemy radar and air defense tracking. Only after arriving in country, during training for the upcoming mission, did pilots and commanders learn that the signals emitted by Army ground surveillance radar were identified as enemy air defense tracking systems. To limit the possibility of fratricide, units implemented an additional control measure, namely, turning off all GSR when Apaches arrived in sector. To assist the Apache pilots, the commander of 141 Infantry, Lieutenant Colonel Jim Hillman, coordinated with them to identify the flot. At approximately 40 minutes after midnight, the task force commander, Colonel David Weissman, suspended all indirect fire to clear airspace for the Apaches.
And that range is 4.8, and that puts it on the, showing on the 2-5 grid line. Iron Deuce 6, Gunfighter 6. Iron Deuce 6. Roger. What has happened here is that you have a Bradley, and let me give you the grid of this Bradley. Okay, you have a Bradley at 9046 245, and he's oriented north on the screen line. He's got an APC near him also. Then off to his right are these two vehicles that I see, and those are the vehicles at 915270. Your Bradley is not even looking anywhere near them. Over. 4 kilometers. The box-like vehicles, the box APC type vehicles are consistent with the type that was fired earlier, Break. I have no forces forward of the 2-5 grid line.
Colonel Weissman ordered them to destroy the targets, but the pilots hesitated as they had yet to make a positive identification.
Well, I'm going to tell you, it's hard to pull this trigger. Back me up a little bit here. Tell me, I'm firing heading 070, 3,800 meters.
The high winds and limited visibility combined to misorient his crew. While Hales believed the aircraft was oriented north, the high winds had caused the aircraft to drift so that they were instead pointed northeast.
Okay. I'll be firing in about 10 seconds. Roger.
Lieutenant Colonel Hales fired 2 Hellfire missiles.
I hope it's enemy.
That's all right. Just stay on them.
Here it comes.
That's one.
I guess you could say that hit it.
All right. Now let's take a look at the second one.
Seconds later, the GSR vehicle was destroyed as well. The 3 remaining scouts and all 3 GSR crew members were wounded. Lieutenant Colonel Hales identified 2 individuals staggering away from the second vehicle.
There are no hot targets. Oh, got 2 personnel walking away from the targets. Roger, you got guns?
He ordered his wingman to engage with the 30mm cannon. It was then that Lieutenant Colonel Hillman broke into the transmission.
Let's solve it. The kiss it.
Reporting that maybe friendly vehicles may have been hit over. What? Roger, I was afraid of that. I was really afraid of that.
Major General Rame, who had been monitoring the engagement on the battalion's command net, ordered it broken off immediately. As the Apaches returned to their assembly area, Task Force Iron continued the fight. For the next 2 hours, the task force continued to have sporadic contact, but by 0300, enemy activity had ceased. There were numerous mistakes made that night. Although 7th Corps had standard operating procedures for identifying friendly forces and preventing fratricide, many of these proved ineffective during periods of limited visibility. Thermal tape applied to vehicles was often indistinguishable at ranges over 1,000 meters. Infrared strobe lights provided a visual marker under passive night vision devices, but were not visible through the thermal systems used by Army ground and air combat systems. The most common marking system was a black inverted V painted on vehicle hulls. Another common marker was red VS-17 marker panels tied to the back or top of vehicles. Although many field expedients were tried, the most common limited visibility markings were red lens flashlights tied to bustle racks on tanks and Bradleys. Unfortunately, these were not visible through thermal sights.
In addition to vehicle recognition signals, commands exchange liaisons, coordinate closely with adjacent units, co-locate command posts during complex operations, and use control measures to prevent fratricide. Despite having coordinated with Lieutenant Colonel Hillman to identify the FLOT does not apply to small, long-range reconnaissance assets that may be positioned beyond it. In these circumstances, friendly forces forward of the FLOT may have a restrictive fire support coordination measure, such as a restrictive fire area or a no-fire area placed around them to prevent friendly fire incidents. Commanders also establish a limit of advance, or LOA, to prevent fratricide. The limit of advance is a phase line used to control the forward progress of an attack. The attacking unit does not advance any of its elements or assets beyond the LOA, but it can push its security forces, such as reconnaissance assets, to that limit.
Because the enemy contact was well beyond the FLOT and beyond the range of direct fire weapon systems, Task Force Iron should have continued to observe rather than develop the situation by fire. The movement by Iraqi Reconnaissance Battalion opposite 141 Infantry was a demonstration designed to draw U.S. forces into revealing their locations and disposition. Task Force Iron's counter-reconnaissance operation was complicated by the stresses associated with operating in unfamiliar terrain under limited visibility. The open desert made it difficult for commanders to tie control measures, such as the FLOT and LOA, to easily recognizable terrain features that could be used to control movement and ensure an accurate common operating picture. Although they did not compromise their position or yield ground to the Iraqis, 2 of the scouts lost their lives in the confusion and miscommunication that clouded the battlefield that night. In the aftermath of the conflict, the U.S. Army made numerous changes to prevent future incidents of fratricide. On the morning of 18 February, Task Force Iron was ordered to displace south, back through the berm.